starting with Chapter 3, in which we are introduced to two of our protagonists. A light autumnal rain was falling along the trade road heading east from Mossy Bluff. Erasmus and Odoc had been on the road for roughly 3 weeks, and in that time there had been three consistents: the rain, the lack of available horses, and the pessimistic fretting of Odoc Overhill. This whole thing is ridiculous, ludicrous, inconceivably half-witted. Don't forget, Erasmus added, jingling their coin purse, the best paying job we've ever worked. I still can't believe you convinced Lannister Ravenclaw to pay us 1,000 gold crowns for this. I still can't believe Lannister Ravenclaw convinced us to go to Hallispire, a kingdom where mortal folk have a hard enough time gaining entry. Odoc looked pointedly at his partner. Never mind what they think of Fey folk. Half Fey folk, Erasmus corrected with an equally pointed glare. And don't worry, I'll keep my hood up and my head down. Be that as it may, the halfling continued, provided we manage to get into the capital without any trouble, and provided we can keep out of trouble while we're there, we have to try and look for someone. Someone, I might add, who we have no information or leads on, only that he or she is roughly 20 years old and an elf. So how hard can that be? Finding the only elf in the great bastion of humanity. If you were the only elf in the great bastion of humanity, Odoc looked incredulously, what lengths would you go to not stick out? Erasmus didn't respond, but rather had his attention drawn toward the faint sound of bustle up ahead. I think there's a caravan in the distance. Oh, good, Odoc replied, shaking the rainwater from his cloak. Maybe they'll let us use their campfire for the night. And maybe, Erasmus added, with a mischievous smirk playing on his face, they'll let us use one of the coaches for the rest of the trip. Odoc could not help but smile and shake his head. Knowing that look on Erasmus's face, and knowing that while the night's events had the potential to end with the pair walking the ever-darkening trade road in the rain, they also had the potential to end with a cushy coach ride the rest of the way to Hallispire. Regardless of the outcome, however, Odoc was certain that the night would not be an uneventful one. The fire at the caravan's campsite was friendly and welcoming. Erasmus Stonehand was anything but. This was not to say that he and Odoc were being overtly rude to the 6 men and 1 woman who had allowed them shelter for the night, but the half-elf's patience for his hosts was slowly diminishing. Sitting semicircular around the opposite end of the fire were the occupants of the 2 wagons that formed the caravan. All appeared to be farmers and peasants, and 5 of the men were flanking the 6th, who had on his lap his newlywed bride. The men were raucously regaling stories of tavern brawls and sexual conquests. All the while, the bride held the kind of smile indicative of someone who is not at all enjoying oneself. "I'm not," the bridegroom slurred, waving his flagon about. "This one I met, this little hen. You see, our dad was about to come after me with a hatchet after he'd heard about what I did with his other daughter." His cohorts roared with drunken laughter while Odoc stared uncomfortably into his own untouched flagon, and Erasmus smiled a polite, if completely disingenuous smile. But then I tells him, "Wait, you don't know who I am." Sure enough, as soon as he finds out my uncle's liege lord what owns the land he's standing on, he starts groveling. Damn fool is on the brink of blubbering, telling me his daughter's all mine if I want her for a little wifey. The following belch emitted by the groom was such that Erasmus could have sworn he saw the fire raise as a result. "Get to the good pa, Ogden," one of the other men spurned, "before you pass out and forget." "I'm getting to it, you great ass," Ogden turned and shouted, then turned back to his guest. So I tells the poor bugger, I don't want his daughter for a wife, 'cause she ain't a virgin no more. More inebriated laughter ensued. "So then, he shows me this little hen, tells me she'd never not known a man." He pinched her cheek with lecherous affection. "She ain't the prettiest, but I'll tell you what, she's prettier than Duggan's sister." One man, presumably Duggan, laughed and gestured vulgarly at Ogden. Another of the men, presumably not Duggan, spoke up. "Oh, that's my wife you're talking about." Another of the men, presumably neither Duggan nor his brother-in-law, piped in. "Ah, please, Jadis. Your wife couldn't get a pig to kiss her if she was covered in shit. And the gods know she tried." Through the laughter, Erasmus stood up and cleared his throat. He reached into his pack and pulled out his mandolin. "Gentlemen, milady," he said, suddenly winking at Odoc, "can I interest you in a song?" The men began to cheer and call out requests. "Play the one about the Horror Pheasant Keep." No, play the one about the man what caught his wife with another man and then got himself another wife. I was thinking, Erasmus raised a silencing hand. Something a bit more dulcet. And with that, Erasmus began to pluck softly at the strings of his mandolin and sing in a rough-hewn tenor, a lullaby. Best ye night, child, till's the end of the day. The moon in the sky and the fae folk at play. For if you should wake, for the sunlight should break, then the pixies and wisps shall spirit you away. Rest ye now, child, though it is warm this night, calling through veils every satyr and sprite. For if you make a sound while there's fae folk around, then I shall never again have your face in my sight. Erasmus never knew the origin of the tune, past it being one his mother taught him in his youth, and had yet to meet anyone else who even knew it. As his fingers plucked the strings and danced across the instrument's neck, he kept note of his audience, who had begun to grow quiet and still. Erasmus continued into the second verse amid the captive group, the lyrics changing from the common tongue to Elvish. Come with me, child, for there's much you could see. I'll teach you to dance among river and tree. Be not filled with fear as I beckon you near, for the fae offer but jollity and glee. Come with me, child, for the start of the day. My voice will keep you without pause or delay. So look deep in my eyes whilst the moon rules the skies, and know the kingdom of wood has you in its sway. As Erasmus finished the tune, he was pleased to see 6 sets of glazed eyes staring at him with vacant attentiveness. He looked to Odoc and nodded, to which the halfling responded by removing the bits of wax he had discreetly placed in his ears before Erasmus had begun his performance. Gentlemen, Erasmus announced, I think perhaps you all ought to sleep and forget this night. The 5 men, needing no further prompting, and making not a sound, obliged the request, curling up around the fire. Odoc let loose a small chuckle and shook his head. The bumpkins are always your best crowds. Simple minds, Erasmus said plainly. Now, old friend, if you'd be so kind as to help me bind their hands and feet. And their coin? Relieve them of it. Swine have little use for gold. As the 2 went swiftly about their task, Odoc motioned to the woman, still sitting silently, staring blankly. And her? We can't well send her back to her hometown. Erasmus nodded and pursed his lips a moment in concentration. He strode over to the woman and looked into her eyes. Milady, tell me your name. Nell, the woman responded flatly. Nell Ashwood. Nell, Erasmus said, still looking into her eyes. Come dawn, you will take one of these wagons and ride it to East Felladale. When you reach East Felladale, you will go to a tavern called the Merchant's Den. You will ask for the owner, a halfling named Orn Rathlight. Tell him that Erasmus Stonehand sent you, with regards, and he will give you a room and a job. He looked to Odoc, who was in the process of counting the coins he'd taken from the sleeping men. How much? Less than you'd expect from a large nephew and his cronies, he mused. 25 crowns and 12 coppers all in all. Pass it over. Erasmus held out his hand. What? But nothing. We have plenty of our down payment left, and you can bet that some of that was this poor creature's to begin with. Odoc gave the resigned huff of someone who knew he'd been beaten by logic, and slid the coins into one of the purses and gave it to Erasmus, who then placed it in Nell's hands, and looked back into her eyes. At dawn, you ride for East Felladale and begin your life anew. You understand? Nell slowly nodded. Good. And now, off to sleep with you. Erasmus took the woman by the hand and started to lead her away from the fire, toward the tents pitched between the wagons. Odoc looked at his partner disapprovingly. So I imagine I'll be taken first watch, then? Don't be ridiculous, Erasmus countered defensively. If I want to charm a woman into my bed, I can do so without arcana, thank you very much. Erasmus led the woman to the tent, and when she climbed inside, he turned to Odoc. Besides, we've not got any time to play. We have to leave. Now? In the dead of night? Of course, Erasmus said, untying one of his caravan horses from a nearby tree. With a wagon, if we leave now, we could make it to Hellespire by midday tomorrow. Fine enough, Odoc said as he gathered his belongings. But seeing as this was your idea, first shift driving is yours. All this excitement has tired me right out. And now to switch gears, we are going to the main protagonist of the story. Enna sat next to her father as the wagon rolled along the dirt road to Reth. The capital city was not so far that the weekly excursions were a great inconvenience, but the distance was substantial enough that it took a solid 4 hours one way in ideal weather. In the last 4 years the pair had made the trip, the nature of how they passed the time on the road had changed gradually. When Anna was younger, Randus made a point of doing what he could to keep his daughter entertained. Over the years, as the excursion became more and more routine, the need to fill the trip with hours of oftentimes forced conversation dwindled. Now when the two talked, they did so comfortably, and when the two sat in silence, they did so comfortably as well. Currently, the latter was the case, and while Randus was at the horse's reins, Anna sat thinking, remembering. She thought back to when she was much younger, about 10 or 11. Her family had gone to Reth that market day as an excursion. It was one of the few times at that point Anna had been to the capital, when the sights and sounds and smells were all still fresh. She remembered being overwhelmed by the colossal front gates, the doors of wood and iron that were taller even than her house, and straight-faced guards in shiny plate armor that greeted the wagon. One guard asked her farther questions, while the other looked through the wagon. Once the men were finished, they called to more guards atop the great gate, and the doors slowly opened. The city's interior was much like the smaller towns in Hallowspire that Anna had visited up to that point. People lined the streets, many with carts or booths set up selling all manner of things. The family found an empty spot for their wagon next to a young halfling couple, who were likely from Summershore to the south, judging by the riverfish they were selling. Anna helped her parents set up the wagon as best she could, gathering produce and laying it out for display, and when everything set, Anna's father stayed to sell, while she and her mother went to explore the market. There were two things about Reth that made it feel different from the other cities that Anna visited in Hallowspire. First was its sheer magnitude. Most of the cities in the kingdom had large town halls, one or two taverns, and a fair number of shops. The larger ones had keeps, numerous inns, and entire sections devoted not only to shops, but to the people who lived within the city walls. Reth, however, dwarfed the others by comparison. The castle alone, the great stone structure at the Reth's center, had grounds that spanned further than an entire area of the smaller cities. Its central spire, a tower that rose so tall that Anna was certain that anyone standing at its peak could see the edges of the kingdom. The other thing that differentiated Reth from the other cities in the kingdom was the presence of the King's Guard. Similar to the guards out front of the city gate, they were adorned with shining plate armor, holding a pike in one hand and a large shield with the King's crest in the other. The guard were not unique in appearance, however it was rather the sheer volume of guards throughout the city. Indeed, one could not move from one street to the next without seeing at least one of the guard patrolling it. Most were friendly enough, nodding to passers-by. A few even said hello to Anna on occasion. When she was much younger, Anna had never noticed, nor paid much mind to the constant presence of the guard. It was on that day, she remembered, that their presence began to seem odd. "Mum," she looked up to her mother, "why are there so many Kingsguard around Reth?" "Well, sweet," her mother had answered, "do you remember when your father and I began to teach you about the four kingdoms?" Anna nodded. "Yes, Mum. Hallowspire, Lovast, Mahadrin, and Guest." "That's right, and who rules the four kingdoms?" "The kings, of course," Anna thought a moment. "Oh, and the queen in Lovast." "And who, besides the kings and queens," her mother had continued, "are the most powerful individuals in the kingdom?" Anna pondered slightly on this one. "The archmages? The ones who know the best magic." "The archmages," her mother corrected. "And yes, sweet, they are very powerful arcanists." Anna looked down thoughtfully, trying to piece together the conversation. "So, what do the archmages have to do with all the Kingsguard?" "Well, think about it. The most powerful people who aren't royals are arcanists. That means that the arcanists must be very powerful." Anna nodded, following her mother's logic. "So, sweet, tell me, if you were Queen of Hallowspire, would you want lots of people around who were that powerful?" "Sure, why not?" "Because what if 2 or 5 or even 10 of those people decided that they didn't like you?" "Why wouldn't they like me? They never even met me." "Maybe they think they could do a better job ruling Hallowspire," Anna's mother offered. "Now, suppose you had all these very powerful people. Would you feel safe knowing that they could come after you, and that you would be almost totally helpless?" "So, the Kingsguard makes sure that no arcanists go after the king?" "Exactly. In fact, they make sure that no one in the kingdom, especially in Reth, even practices Arcana without proper permissions from the Archmage." From there, Anna's memory jumped ahead to she and her mother going down one of Reth's winding cobblestone streets, to where several artisan tents sold all manner of handcrafted goods, commonalities and oddities in equal measure. Anna's mother had her attention on a tent where an older woman was selling bolts of wool and strings of glass beads, when Anna heard a low, hearty voice from behind them. "Fine crystal or stonework for the 2 lovely ladies." Anna looked over to see a stout, bearded man, no taller than she, with striking violet eyes, dark hair, and pale skin. You're a dwarf, she said in an excited whisper. And a Summerlark, your manners. Her mother turned to face the dwarf. I'm sorry, my daughter didn't mean to offend. Not many dwarves make their way to Hallispire. It's nothing, the dwarf shrugged, then tipped his hat and gave a slight bow. Adric Thornmallet at the lady's service. Adric gave young Anna a wink, causing her to giggle. Anna's mother admired the wares in the dwarf's tent. Your pieces are gorgeous, Master Thornmallet. Adric will do just fine, he responded, if it pleases my lady. Oh, hi, Magnus, Anna's mother blushed. Tessa Summerlark, and this is my daughter, Anna. What fine names, Adric grinned through his black braided beard. Anna, he turned to her. That's an elven name, if I'm not mistaken. Anna nodded excitedly. Yes, sir. My dad said he heard it once while he was a merchant, and that he thought it was the prettiest name, so he was going to give it to the prettiest girl. Well, Adric let out a bellowing chuckle. Your dad sounds like a smart man with a good eye for beauty. If I weren't so wise, I'd think he'd have plucked you from the Fae folk with his bare hands. Anna shared a laugh with the dwarf. That's silly. There's no Fae folk in Hallispire, right, Mum? That's right, sweet. Anna's mother smiled politely at the dwarf. Well, I'll tell you what. Adric ducked behind his display and began to rummage. I think I've got just the pieces here. He emerged with a dainty jade bracelet adorned with dwarven lettering, and a thin leather necklace with a small quartz pendant dangling from it. Anna's eyes widened as she looked at the jewelry. Oh, Mum, they're so pretty. Anna's mother pursed her lips contemplatively. They are very lovely, she said to Adric. For my ladies, a piece and 3, the dwarf offered with a grin. That little, Anna's mother said in disbelief. But Master Thornmallet, Adric, please. Adric, she continued, that is very generous, but these materials, surely we'd be taking advantage of you. Nonsense, Adric waved his hand dismissively. Where I come from, I could throw a rock and hit a finer rock. And that first rock would be more precious to begin with. He let out with another guffaw. Trust me, my offer is more than fair for everyone. All I ask is that whenever you happen to be here for market day, you come look for old Adric and say hello. He turned to Anna. And make sure you wear one of these pieces so I know who it is when some beautiful young woman comes to greet me. It happens so little I might otherwise get confused. Anna put up her hand to cover the fact that she was blushing, and looked up at her mother hopefully. Well, all right, her mother said after a moment, reaching into her coin purse to pay the dwarf. But keep the pieces in your bag, sweet, so we can show them to your father. Anna did so. The pair thanked the dwarf and went out their day. Anna's memory now drifted past the rest of the day spent in wrath, and to that night, when she snuck out of her bedroom to collect the pendant she had left in the kitchen, when she heard her parents talking. I'm telling you, Randus, he knew something. Well, I'm not saying it's impossible, Tess. He wouldn't have been from around here, he'd know the look. He'd have seen them often enough to know. So why aren't you worried? Because this is Hallispire. King Renton would sooner work the local men and women halfway to death before he'd ask for help from an outside kingdom. Maybe you're right. I just worry. By this point, Anna knew the conversation wasn't going to end anytime soon, just as she knew that she would be in trouble for being out of bed this late. She went back to bed, and when she awoke, the quartz pendant and on the leather necklace was sitting on her bedside table. After that, Anna went to market day only once before she turned 16, when she began to go and help her father. Every trip she wore the pendant, hoping to see Adric. By the time she turned 18, she no longer expected that she may one day reunite with the jovial dwarf from her childhood. She still wore the pendant on market day, though mostly out of habit. It was a lovely pendant after all. You know, Randus said to Anna, pulling her back from her memories, your mom almost didn't want you to keep that thing. He caught Anna twirling the pendant idly, as she often did without knowing. Well, I'm glad she did, Anna smiled back. It's still so pretty, and it reminds me of a great day. The two continued on in comfortable silence until reaching the main gates into Reth.